So, you're thinking of running Curse of Strahd. Greetings, fellow Mist Wanderers. My name is Steve Morgan, and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. This is a new channel. This is only actually the second video I've made. And in this video, I wanted to cover sort of introductory resources for Curse of Strahd for people who are thinking of running it. It's a already very overwhelming campaign because it's a sandbox and there's a lot going on. And I appreciate that some of the stuff I'm given is additional guides, modifications, things like that. So I'm going to try and tell you what's available, but try not to overwhelm you too much. So what I'm getting at is it's not going to be comprehensive. I think it would be a few hours of video if it was a comprehensive guide to running Curse of Strahd. But it's kind of just, if you're brand new to Curse of Strahd, you've just bought the book. Oh, let me get the book. You've just bought the book, then it should help you to get started and know what's available and out there. If you are new to Curse of Strahd and running it for the first time, I don't think there's anything wrong with running it straight out of the book without many modifications. I think it can be very easy to go the other way and get carried away and add all the modifications, and then of course that can confuse things, it can cause problems. When I ran it, I mostly stuck to the book, but tweaked things I liked the look of and the sound of. And I think if I were to run it a second time, that would be when I get stuck and add more things into the mix to keep things spicy. I'd also like to say as well, the fact that it's not going to be comprehensive means I can't include everything and everyone. I'm going to include the very common, well-known guides and mods. I'm also going to cover things like books and novels, maps, art. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes on the screen over here. Music and communities. There will be people I haven't included, not because they're not good. It might be the case that I've just not checked them out. A good example of this is one of the guides a lot of people have recommended. His name is Pyram King. I've personally not used his stuff, so I've given him an honourable mention now, and I'll give him one at the end of the sort of guides mod section. But I don't think it'd be right for me to say, hey, use this guide, and I've not even looked at it. So obviously, if you are a creator and I've not included you, I'm very sorry. It's not because I don't like your stuff. It might be because I've just not come across you. Guides and mods. Okay, so there's a few guides and mods that are really popular and really heavily recommended in the Curse of Strahd community. I've used all the ones I'm going to mention before I get to the honourable mentions. I've used, or at least I've used bits of them. I can't say I ran them exactly like 100% of all the modifications, but I tended to cherry pick and use stuff piecemeal. I'll use a few examples of what I used and would recommend. Firstly, we have Curse of Strahd Reloaded, also known as Dragnacarta because that's the name of the user who created all the stuff. Curse of Strahd Reloaded started off as just like Google Docs, added to the Curse of Strahd subreddit. I believe he's going through the process at the moment of, he's got a Patreon and he's almost doing like a version 2. I've not looked at any of the version 2 stuff, so I can't vouch for that. I've heard some people are really, really big fans though, and I think he's got a good following, which is well earned. I used some of his stuff sparingly in my run of Curse of Strahd. One of his suggestions was actually one of the highlights in my campaign. In Argynvostholt, he suggests adding a silver guard drake, which my players adopted, and she, like, they decided she was a girl. Her name, they called her Sylvia. I roleplayed her as only making one noise, which was meh, and they loved her. And then she died in the final battle, and they held a funeral for her and everything. It was amazing. I have also seen the stuff he recommends for Castle Ravenloft. The dinner as well. So if you're running the dinner, as a lot of DMs do, where it's sort of like a diplomatic meeting as opposed to the trap, which is what it is in the book, then he gives some great tips there. I believe he also, this is me assuming this is the same guide, and his guide has the brides and the consorts split throughout the castle, sort of taking over different rooms and things like that, or different territories. So that's really cool as well. So I recommend taking a look at his stuff if you get a chance. I also recommend MandyMod. MandyMod isn't very active on Reddit anymore, but she had a series which she called Fleshing Out Curse of Strahd, and she each chapter was dedicated to each part of the story, like, a bit like the book is, or each chapter is dedicated to a location. So was hers. So with MandyMod, just off the top of my head, her stuff is just really good for like another, like if you're running a chapter, like you know your players are going to the werewolf den, or they're going to Memoirs, or they're going to Vanishing's Tower. It's worth, and this is the same with Dragnacarta and all these suggestions really, is just have a look at the chapter and just see, is there anything I can change, anything I can add beyond the book. You might think no, and you want to run it as is, or you might like look at it and change some stuff. Beyond that, she gives some great tips for role-playing and running some of the NPCs. She gives great advice on the Vistani. She also gives great advice on Irina. So instead of, because not a lot of people like escort missions, and that's how Irina can sometimes come across as, she suggests giving Irina a bit more agency, making her a bit more useful, giving her a bit more personality as well. And then I think that kind of changes her from somebody the players might treat as like a sort of escort mission and just, oh, let's just discard her in Vallaki or in Kresk, to being someone who they really connect with, and then they actually, care about what happens to her. Lunch Break Heroes. Lunch Break Heroes started off as a series of videos. Each video was sort of like a chapter in corresponding with the book. They've since gone and created a guide, I believe it's called Raising the Stakes, which is almost like a written version. One big comprehensive guide covering all the chapters, which then link off to each of the YouTube videos. I didn't use a lot of Lunch Break Heroes stuff, but when I did use it, it worked really well. And one example I remember was the Werewolf Den. Their suggestions for making amends to the Werewolf Den I found really useful, and I ran kind of their version more than I ran the version in Curse of Strahd, and it worked really well. No fun allowed. So I can't remember this guy's name, but I just remember he's very nice, very friendly, very chatty. He does YouTube videos where all he basically does is runs through each chapter with the map and him in the corner, I believe, and just basically says, right, this is room 1. This is the kind of stuff you can expect here. If you're thinking of changing it, this is what you could do. This is room 2, this is room 3, and so on and so on. So it's essentially just running through the book step by step. There are some people who prefer this, I suppose, a video where someone's talking you through it as opposed to just reading in a book. We all learn in different ways, right? I found it useful for the really big areas such as Argynvostholt, Amber Temple, and Castle Ravenloft. And I found that, like, if I'm just doing a boring task ahead of a session, such as just folding laundry or doing the washing up, it was just really good to have the video on in the background to watch and to listen to, and found that very helpful. Honourable mentions go to the following: Pyram King, who I mentioned earlier on. Guildsbounty is a user who has done some great guides on some of the NPCs. I believe it's them who's created a guide called something like How to Run Strahd as an Unholy Terror. And that is amazing for getting into Strahd's head and understanding his goals and his motives more than just what's laid out in the book. Another honourable mention I'd like to mention is The Wedding of Ravenloft by Wyatt Troll. I haven't actually used any of Wyatt's resources, but I've heard very, very good things about The Wedding of Ravenloft, which is sort of helps with ending it and motivating the characters to go to Castle Ravenloft, kind of putting a big ticking clock at the end of the whole thing and a big rescue where you've got to try and rescue Irina before it's too late. And the interactive Tome of Strahd, I discovered the interactive Tome of Strahd just after reading the Tome of Strahd, after my players discovered it in my game. And if I'd had known about it, I probably would have run it. It sort of fleshes out the tome, almost treats it as almost like flashback. I guess the best comparison for those of you who know Harry Potter, spoilers for Harry Potter, in the second book / movie, when he reads Tom Riddle's diary and there's flashbacks to, like, he's almost like sees it all play out in front of him. That's essentially what the interactive Tome of Strahd is. So I think the players can almost like see what happens when Strahd first takes over the valley and stuff like that. I haven't dug deep into it, so apologies if I have that wrong, but it might be worth taking a look at as well. Books and novels. Books and novels. So I think, to be honest, if you've got the Curse of Strahd book, you are set. 2 optional books I would recommend are Strahd the Memoirs of a Vampire, which is one of the old Ravenloft novels they made back in like the 90s and noughties. Forgive me for saying noughties. And it's essentially, again, an expanded version of the Tome of Strahd. A lot of people say you got to take it with a pinch of salt, because if it's Strahd's events, he could have embellished a little. It could be biased because it's his perspective, not like a true account of things. So do take that in mind. But it's a really good way of getting into Strahd's head and understanding him. And it's a fun read. Talking about, it starts off with how he first conquers the valley, up until the famous wedding and his transformation. It was obviously created in the time of an earlier edition, so the events don't necessarily line up with the events of Curse of Strahd. For instance, how he makes his pact. But it's still just really good and insightful in understanding him. I hadn't actually written this in my notes, but I've just realised if you want to get into Strahd's head more, there's more Ravenloft novels where he's featured. Knights of the Black Rose, if I remember that being the title, which is about a character called Lord Soth, who I think appears in other D&D and even 5th edition stuff. Vampire of the Mists, which the name of this YouTube channel is a homage to that novel, featuring the sort of good vampire, if you can call him that, Jan the Sunstar. And there's also a sequel to Strahd, which is called Strahd, The War Against Azalin. There might be other novels he's mentioned in, I'm not sure, but he's definitely mentioned in those. And then another book, which again is optional, don't feel like you need to get it, is Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. This, I think, is useful for understanding. It contains Barovia, but to be honest with you, it doesn't really, or at least in my experience, it doesn't really add much to what's already in Curse of Strahd. It almost like condenses and talks about it briefly, almost for the benefit of, say, somebody who had Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, but not Curse of Strahd, but wanted to include Barovia in, like, say, a wider Ravenloft campaign. It also includes more information for people like Dr. Rudolf van Richten, or Richten. I think I always say Richten and it's kind of stuck, but I think the actual pronouncing is Van Richten. Esmeralda, or Ez, as she's known for short, and, well, I mentioned Jan the Sunstar, and some other famous sort of Ravenloft NPCs, some of whom don't appear in Curse of Strahd, but some people like to add them, such as the Weathermay Foxgrove twins could potentially end up in Barovia as well, and Jan the Sunstar. Maps. On the maps front, we are spoilt, because the maps in the book are great, but they don't necessarily cover everywhere. For instance, there's no random encounter maps, and places like Berez and Yester Hill have big maps, which I think are like 50 feet or 100 feet per square, but then they don't have sort of condensed down maps of dedicated areas like the top of Yester Hill or the actual particular areas of interest, such as the church and the ruins of the manor in Berez. Oh, where to start with this one? I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention DM Andy. I think his username on Reddit is something like Snoo Tangerines, if you see it. DM Andy, I think, is probably the most comprehensive. As far as I'm aware, he's covered every single area in Curse of Strahd, including additional areas. He is great. I believe he went through and did almost like a second version of all of the maps, and he's even done them for things like the Tome of Strahd locations. He's currently working on a version of Castle Ravenloft, where if it was all sort of restored, so potentially if, say, Petrina takes it over in the future, or if maybe when Strahd returns. There is also another one that goes by the name of, and forgive me if I butcher this pronunciation, Aonbarr Cartography. I think they also go by the name of Eladril on Reddit. They, I believe, also have covered all of the locations of Curse of Strahd, much like DM Andy has. I think I used a couple of the maps. I think I used their map for a battle that was held just outside Lake Zarovich, where my players, after sorting out the Mad Mage, I planted a battle with one of the brides who had some low-level undead with her, and that was really good. Morvold Press. If you've had a look at like map makers, or you've run another campaign like Lost Mine of Phandelver, then you might have come across Morvold Press, because I believe they've done a lot of maps, and they've done a lot of maps for other campaigns. I believe it's he, is currently working his way through all of the maps in Curse of Strahd. I think he's about halfway through. The MAD Cartographer. I've only discovered this one recently, but I also like their maps. I believe they're also working their way through. Oh, my cat's just come in and ruined the take. I might leave that in, actually. It's quite authentic. If you hear distant meowing, you gonna jump on my lap? Come on. No, just gonna ruin the take instead then. And an honourable mention goes to the Dungeon Madams, who have just left Patreon. They had some great, they had a great style and some great maps as well. And I believe they did a version of the Village of Barovia where it was almost like without the roofs, and every single house had something in it. Art. As someone who has the worst artistic skills in the world, to give you an example, I once drew a picture of a sheep and then put on Instagram, does this look like a sheep or a polar bear? And 100% of people said polar bear. I'm in awe of people who have artistic talent. When it comes to landscapes of Curse of Strahd, there could be other people out there, but the absolute best, in my opinion, is JamesRPGArt. My cat's now joined me, by the way. That's why this tail is here. I'm gonna leave it in, so you're just gonna see a tail wagging every now and again, I think. JamesRPGArt is incredible and has covered pretty much all the locations in Curse of Strahd, and I think is now doing other campaigns as well. I think he might have done some Witchlight stuff, some Ghost of Saltmarsh stuff, but as far as I know, has covered pretty much everywhere in Curse of Strahd, including every possible place you can fight Strahd in Castle Ravenloft as a result of the card reading, directing people to different places within the castle, and even places that aren't, you know, hugely significant in the book that they want in a picture. Good example of this is, I think, multiple locations within the Aonbarr Temple itself, such as the vault where the main Aonbarr vestiges are, the main hallway, I think even one of the smaller rooms of the vestiges in, stuff like that really. So the attention detail is incredible. When it comes to NPCs, there are loads of artists who have done great artwork. I think if you just did a Google search for Curse of Strahd NPC name, you would be, and then looked at images, you would be set. This one I don't think a lot of people realize is the Curse of Strahd subreddit did a commission of all of the, about 8 different NPCs, people like Strahd himself, Raheden, Irina, Ismark, and so on. And then I think later did another one. So I think there's 16 NPCs, major NPCs in Curse of Strahd, all done in the same style that you can just use and download for free. And recently I came across someone called Caleb is Drawing. They're on Patreon. They do share a lot of their stuff on, a lot of his stuff on Reddit. In fact, as I record this, the most recent artwork he's done is Strahd upon his nightmare Bucephalus, I think that's how you pronounce that, which just looks amazing. So, and of course, the great thing about using a consistent style is all the artwork will, you know, be consistent and look great across the board. There is obviously great art in the book, but some NPCs just look spooky from the get-go, such as the Baron and the Baroness in Vallaki. And some people aren't included. Like, obviously there's art for Van Richten, but there isn't art for his half-elf bard persona, Rictavio. So hopefully those suggestions and more have you covered. Music. Okay, I got a bit carried away there, but my point is, it'd be a bit pointless if I just talked over this and you didn't hear how amazing it is. Lots of people do lots of different things for music. They'll use music from video games or TV shows or movies they like, and that's fine. I really recommend tabletop audio. I've been using tabletop audio since I started DMing in 2020 with Lost Mine of Phandelver, and some of you may already be familiar with tabletop audio because it's already included in, some of the music is already included in Roll20 by default. I think, without knowing the particulars, I assume he had some sort of deal or arrangement with Roll20, which at some point stopped, because now you get to a certain point in his sort of back catalogue and you don't see songs, some of the songs in Roll20 anymore. He has a Patreon where you can get variations of the songs. You might have a music-only one, an ambience-only one, or there's somewhere, say if it was like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head. Oh, say if it was like a carriage ride, it might be the music and the sound effects of the forest, but not the horse galloping, for example. So you can, some of them have like multi-use. A few years ago, I posted on Reddit a list of what songs I recommend, and I'm going to do a dedicated video that covers all of that. But in the meantime, look in the description, there's a link to that post. I come up with songs for different chapters, different locations, different circumstances, using tabletop audio's music. Communities. No community is perfect, and some communities have their jerks and their trolls and people who make fun of people who don't know obvious stuff from the book. The problem with Curse of Strahd, it's obviously an amazing module, but some information is really... The information can sometimes be difficult to dig out. A great example is I was talking to someone on Reddit the other day about something about Petrina's backstory. She's a love interest of Strahd before Strahd became a vampire. And of all the places, a really important detail about her personality was mentioned. It was in the appendix write-up for Richten, which makes sense because Richten was involved with what happened to her. But it's not really somewhere you think to look if you're thinking, oh, I want information for Petrina. She's buried in Castle Ravenloft, so I'll look there. Oh, she's the sister of Casimir, so I'll look at his information. But you wouldn't necessarily think to look in Richten's backstory. So the good thing about communities is if you're like, I'm sure I read this somewhere, where is this? And someone's probably got your back. Maybe it'll be me, because I sometimes jump in and say, oh, I remember where I read that in the book. Reddit, I have a funny history with Reddit, so I always used to think Reddit was quite a toxic, negative place, and that is true of some, maybe a lot of subreddits, but the Curse of Strahd subreddit is probably some of the most genuinely nice and helpful people I've ever known on the internet, having used the internet since the 90s. Oh no, my cat's walking into the shot and my camera's wobbling. Mel! Yes, that's right, sniff my camera. Oh, where was I? Curse of Strahd subreddit. It's just a great place, and I think the majority of people there, you can't escape. There'll be some people who troll, there'll be some people who say, read the book, it's in the book, and stuff like that, but the vast majority of people there are incredible, and it gave me a whole other perspective on what I thought Reddit was like. There's also a great Facebook group. Without looking at my notes, I think it's something like a Curse of Strahd for DMs or something to that effect. That is also very helpful. My strategy is usually post in Reddit, and then if I don't get much of a response from Reddit, I post on Facebook in that group as well. I'm not much of a user of Discord, but if you use Discord and you like using Discord, I've heard both the Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft Discords are good. Well, that's a good point. There's also a great Ravenloft subreddit. I wanted to keep this to just Curse of Strahd stuff, but sometimes, especially when it comes to Curse of Strahd and Barovia as a whole, Strahd as a whole, or if you want more information about NPCs that also Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft as a whole, such as Esmeralda and Rudolph van Richten, then you can't go wrong with also checking there. And I think that's everything for now. Like I said, it's not comprehensive. I didn't want to overwhelm new DMs. I just wanted to give a starting point. And for people who are watching this who aren't new DMs, I hope this has been useful to you. I'm hoping to put out more videos in the future, not just Curse of Strahd, but Ravenloft as well. I'm currently running a Ravenloft campaign as a sequel to Curse of Strahd, so there'll probably be, I think the next video might be something like How I Ran, the Sea of Sorrows, or Fulkovnia, those kinds of things. I'm about to run Valachan, although it might be pronounced Valakan, so keep an eye out for that. I've also put out a DM's Guild resource called The Second Tarokka Reading, which is if you want to continue Ravenloft adventures after Curse of Strahd with the same characters beyond level 10, it's a good way of giving purpose and direction to a domain hopping campaign. You essentially get another card reading like the one that Madame Eva gives, that directs people to magic items and an eye spread throughout all the domains of Dread. And because I clearly have too much time on my hands, there's 3 clues per card instead of 1 clue per card, which is the case in Curse of Strahd, or sometimes 2 if you for some of the allies, to make sure that there's lots of variety and you don't end up getting the same domain 3 times. Thank you, Mist Wanderers. And I had some sort of script to end this video, but I think I'm just going to end with my cat, who's literally just sat here, and just do a cool little fade out on her, and in the background you can see my messy office space. Say hi, Mel.